Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Dr. Ramchandra Guha as our chief guest, a historian and a biographer based in Bangalore. Dr. Guha's books and essays have been translated in more than 20 languages. His awards include Leopold Heidi Prize of the American Society of Environmental History, the UK Cricket Society's Literary Prize, the Ramnath Goenka Award, the Sahitya Akademi Award, Padma Bhushan, and Fukuoka Prize. We request Dr. Ramchandra Guha to address all present here with his esteemed words.
Dr. Naushad Forbes, Sri Padmini Vas, members of the Governing Council, faculty, assembled guests, and above all students. It's a wonderful occasion for the 338 of you who graduated. And as I was watching them get their degrees one by one and file past, several of them, as they passed by me, held their degree and said, "Wow." Now, I understood that and empathized with that completely, because I know, almost from first-hand experience, that the NID degree may even be the most arduous and difficult professional degree you can obtain in India. I studied at what is supposed to be the most prestigious undergraduate college in our country, and I passed my exams by using my friend's notes. I then later on became quite serious and did a PhD, a credible PhD, but I know I did not work as hard as the NID graduates. This is also true of the IIT, the IIMs, the IIMS. These are all difficult, complicated, arduous professional programs, but the NID degree may possibly be the most difficult and arduous and challenging of them all. So congratulations. Congratulations. I have three things in common with the 338 graduating students today. The first is that my life too was changed by the NID. It was in that corridor outside Mr. Vyas's office that I first met my future wife. And I was then, later on, I started doing a PhD in Calcutta, and I would come to court her. And whenever I would come, by the way, the railway journey from Kolkata to Ahmedabad in those days took 55 hours. And I would come here, and Sujata would be working in the studio and would not leave the studio, because that's how difficult the NID degree was. So that's the first thing I share in common with you. My life was changed by the NID. But I'm going to speak no more about that. I'm going to speak about the second and third things I share in common with you. The second is that as a writer, I also work, let us say, in a creative field, in an interesting, complicated, challenging creative field. And the third thing I share with you, which is what I would focus on today, is that I too, like the 338 of you, am a citizen of India. And I want to explain to you, as a much more elderly citizen of India than you, with 35 years of experience studying, understanding, writing about, unraveling this complicated country of ours, what it means to be a creative person in India. That's going to be the focus of my talk to you today. And I'm going to begin with a quotation from a former US ambassador to India called Robert Blackwell. Robert Blackwell wrote, "India is a pluralist society that creates magic with democracy." India is a pluralist society that creates magic with democracy, rule of law and individual freedom, community relations and cultural diversity. What a place to be an intellectual. I wouldn't mind being born 10 times to rediscover India. This quotation, that India is a place that creates magic with diversity, rule of law, community relations, It's an extraordinary privilege to be an intellectual in India. It's equally a privilege to be a designer, a filmmaker, a musician, an artist, a playwright, anyone working in the creative field. You are lucky to be born in India. There could be places in the world that are safer, that are less corrupt, that are less brutal to their citizens, where the air is not polluted. I'd be happier, for sake of argument, if I was not a writer, but I was in some other field, if I was a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, I would be happier to be a citizen of Sweden. But as a writer, I want to be born nowhere else in India. And if I'm reborn, and as a writer, I'd like to be born here. What makes India so special, so unique, so remarkable for anyone in a creative field, including you designers? There are three things. The first is the extraordinary depth of our civilizational heritage. Although we are a young nation, next year to be later this year to complete 70 years as an independent nation, we are an ancient civilization. So there's the depth of our civilization. That's the first thing that makes us distinctive. The second thing, even more important for anyone in the creative field, is our diversity. India has more Parsis, more Jains, and more Sikhs than any other country in the world. Australia calls itself a Christian nation, but we have more Christians than Australia. We have more Muslims than almost all the members of the Organization of Islamic Nations. And of course, yet we are a majority Hindu country. So it's our religious diversity, and even more remarkable, but perhaps less appreciated, is our linguistic diversity. If you look at our rupee note, on that rupee note are 17 different languages in 17 different scripts. No other nation has comparable linguistic diversity. And each of these languages, Tamil, Kannada, Urdu, Marathi, Gujarati, Odia, Bengali, each of these languages has a long and rich and incredibly robust and alive literary tradition. Then there's our ethnic diversity, our aesthetic diversity, our technological diversity. We still have Stone Age hunter-gatherers, and we also have the nuclear bomb. This you will find in no other country in the world. Our culinary diversity. So just the extraordinary diversity of this country is unparalleled. Our ecological diversity. I started life as an environmental historian. And you can go from the highest mountains in the world to the most arid deserts, to the rich tropical rainforests of the Western Ghats, and of course, the scrub forests of the Deccan, a long and very diverse coastline. We are also a marine society, magnificent rivers. So, in terms of our ecological, cultural, linguistic, religious, technological, aesthetic diversity, we are unparalleled. So there's the depth, there's the diversity, and finally, and most importantly, there's the democracy. And the greatness of Indian democracy is that firstly, India was not supposed to be democratic. In the history of the world, we are the first country, the first poor country to attempt democracy. When we became independent in 1947, the visionary founders of this nation, who included Jawaharlal Nehru, who also founded the National Institute of Design, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, his great comrade in arms, the great Baba Saheb B.R. Ambedkar, the main draftsman of our Indian Constitution, these three remarkable people, if there are three people who built, conceptualized a democratic and diverse India, they were Patel, Nehru, and Ambedkar. In whichever order you choose, you can have Ambedkar first, Nehru first, Patel first. But these are the three people who made possible a united and democratic country that crucially respected diversity. As I said, in the Western world, when they were poor, there were no elections. For many decades, women were not allowed to vote in France, in Germany, in the United States. In India, on the other hand, we became independent in 1947. In 1950, we enacted our first constitution. And in our first general election in 1952, everyone, regardless of literacy level or educational status or caste or gender, voted. In 1952, every adult Indian was eligible to vote. In Switzerland, a supposedly an advanced Western country, in some parts of Switzerland, women got the vote only in 1971. And everyone mocked Nehru and Ambedkar. Nehru and Ambedkar, who made universal adult franchise a crucial part of our constitution, they were mocked, not by everyone, by left-wing people, right-wing people, middle-class people said, how can you give the poor the vote? How can you give Dalits the vote? Patriarch said, how can you give women the vote? An editor in Madras wrote in 1952 that our first general election was the biggest gamble in history. In 1967, when we held our fourth general election, the correspondent of the London Times came to India and said, voting by poor people is a farce. And this will be the last general election India will ever hold. And we've held 12 general elections after that. Some years ago, many years ago in fact, about 20 years ago, I was in a conference in the University of California at Berkeley, and my co-panelist was an Indonesian intellectual who had been exiled from his country. And I was visiting, I was an Indian living in India, visiting in Indonesia, and I gave a talk complaining about the immorality and corruption of Indian politics. And this Indian intellectual, Indonesian intellectual, turned to me and said, Ram, at least in your country you have general elections. In my country, we have the election of the generals. And that's true still in many of our surrounding countries, that you have the election of the generals. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, for long periods of time were run by the army. So democracy is an extraordinary achievement, not just the holding of free and fair elections, but free intellectual life, a free media, free movement of people. China was mentioned. China may be ahead of us in some respects, including the number of design graduates, but do you know that if you want to move from your village to a city in China, you need a permit? Unlike Indians, who can travel in any part of the world. I mean, look at this wonderful graduating class with me. I mean, you've come to Ahmedabad from wherever you studied in India. You've not needed permission from your local party chief. You could just travel to any part of this country. And above all, the greatness of the founders of India was that they did not see diversity and democracy as antithetical. They used democracy to deepen, to respect, to affirm, to uphold our diversity, and particularly the diversity of religion and language. And that is what makes India special and unique, that we combine democracy with diversity. When India became independent in 1947, Pakistan became independent at the same time. Pakistan was constituted as an Islamic nation. But the founders of the Indian Republic, people like Nehru and Patel and Ambedkar, were emphatic that India would not be a Hindu state. And that is part of our great success. We have a Muslim majority state, Kashmir. We have several Christian majority states in the northeast, Mizoram and Nagaland among them. We have a Sikh majority state, the Punjab. We have Buddhist majority districts, both Ladakh as well as part of Arunachal Pradesh. So we glory in our diversity, and we glory even more in our linguistic diversity. And this may be an even greater achievement. Most nations of the world were formed on the basis of one religion, one language. To be German, everyone must speak German. To be Polish, everyone must speak Polish. But to be Indian, you can speak Hindi if you want, and you can speak Tamil and Urdu and Kannada and Gujarati if you want. Now, throughout our history as an independent nation, there's been a section of insecure and, dare I say, paranoid politicians who have felt India can only be united if we use one language, if everyone must know Hindi. And in the year 1989, one of these insecure politicians became chief minister of our largest state, Uttar Pradesh, which is a Hindi-speaking state. And it so happened, I will not mention his name, he's still active in politics today, and you can Google and find out who was chief minister of Uttar Pradesh in 1989. But when he was chief minister of Uttar Pradesh in 1989, he wrote a letter to the chief minister of Kerala in Hindi. And the answer came back in Malayalam. Now, it so turned out that there were many fewer people in Lucknow who understood Malayalam than there were people in Trivandrum who understand Hindi. So the chief minister of UP got his lesson, swallowed his pride, and replied in English. One more footnote to this. 30 years before this, another politician from North India was insisting that the Tamils speak Hindi. And he wrote to C. Rajagopalachari, who was a great freedom fighter and our first Governor General, that why do you use English? English is a foreign language. And Rajagopalachari wrote back saying, Saraswati is the goddess of language. She gave birth to all languages, including English. Hence, English is an Indian language. And I think this wise, sensible, humane decision to retain our diversity, to not be paranoid, makes India such an extraordinary place. So you have the diversity, you have the democracy, and you have the depth. The great Kannada writer U.R. Ananthamurthy, who was a friend and mentor of mine, once said, an Indian writer lives simultaneously in the 12th century and the 21st century. Because everywhere, look at the landscape behind us. Wherever we go, there are traces of the old, the not so old, the not so new, the new, and the future. If you are an English writer, you only live in the 21st century. But if you're an Indian writer, or an Indian artist, or an Indian architect, or an Indian designer, or an Indian apparel maker, you live in all centuries. You live in the 12th century and the 21st century, and in all centuries in between. That's what makes the experience of working in the creative field in India so extraordinarily enriching. I've been in this business much longer than you. You will now graduate, you will go out into the world, you'll get your first jobs, you'll travel. You must travel across the world. You must travel to the West, because in many ways the West is, at least in terms of technological sophistication, including in the field of design, has a lot to teach us. I hope you also travel in the neighborhood to our neighboring countries. I've had the enormous pleasure and privilege of visiting all the countries that border India. I visited Pakistan 3 times, China twice, Sri Lanka twice, Nepal 4 or 5 times, Bangladesh. And wherever I've gone, I've learned. I've learned to juxtapose my country, its history, its culture, its literature, its philosophy against those of other countries. So you will travel. And you must travel all across the world. You must also travel in the neighborhood. But I hope that as you mature in your field, you also spend some time in traveling in parts of India that are not your own. India has 29 states. I have traveled through 25 of them, 26 of them, including several states in the Northeast. I have not been to Nagaland and Mizoram, but I will quite soon. But I've been to Arunachal, Manipur, Meghalaya, Assam, Kashmir, and many states I know well. I was born and raised in Dehradun, which is part of Uttarakhand. I studied in Delhi, did a PhD in Kolkata, settled down in Bengaluru. I have traveled extensively in Western India. And my professional work could not have been possible. I could not have written the books I have about this extraordinary, interesting, some often frustrating, complex, but always absorbing country had I not traveled within it. Last week, I was in Kochi, at the Kochi Biennale, which is a fabulous experience artistically. but it's also a fabulous experience sociologically, because Fort Kochi has within it the imprint of Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian cultures. And our guide through the Kochi Biennale was not Hindu, he was not Christian, he was not Jewish, and he was not Muslim, but he was a Sikh. He was an architecture student from Chandigarh, come to help as an interpreter of the Biennale. From Kochi, I went to Maharashtra. I'm coming from Pune, where I had the great privilege of participating in a function felicitating the leading writers, artists, playwrights, and social activists of Maharashtra. And through that, you get a sense of the diversity and the richness of Maharashtra. I am now in Ahmedabad, a city I know well, and not only for romantic reasons. I know Ahmedabad well also because I'm writing a biography of Mahatma Gandhi, and much of my research has been done in the Sabarmati Ashram, where I spent this morning. And I will then go back home tomorrow to Bengaluru. Then I'm going to Tamil Nadu. I'm going to Tanjavur and Kumbakonam, partly because I have not seen the great temples of that area, and partly because a resident of Karnataka, living upstream in the Kaveri, I want to know why the Tamils want the water of Kaveri so much. So it's always a journey. I come back, then I go to Kolkata. And from Kolkata, I go to Kathmandu, because I have not been to Nepal. I'm very attached to Nepal, and I have not been to Nepal after the horrible earthquake they had 2 years ago. And it's through travels such as these that you get a more subtle, more enriched understanding of your own country. Naushad was kind enough to mention my book, India After Gandhi. In that book, which was published 10 years ago, I said, as a multilingual, multi-religious political entity, India anticipated the European Union by 40 years. India was created in the 1940s, Europe was created 30 or 40 years later. So I wrote, as a multilingual, multi-religious political entity, India anticipated the European Union by 30 or 40 years. And today I would say, India will outlive the European Union also by a minimum of 30 or 40 years. So it's this extraordinary richness of diversity of India that would make it a special privilege and joy to be in the creative field. And as you go through your life, I, of course, wish you all professional success and fulfillment. But I would urge you to discover, rediscover, and discover afresh this country of ours. I'll make one last statement, and then I'll end. Naushad also referred to the fact that I'm a patriot. And I want to urge on all of you in this, not just the young students here, but everyone else in this wonderful audience on this most magnificent occasion. I want to draw your attention to what one of our greatest patriots, Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote our national anthem and was no mean artist himself, once said. Tagore distinguished between a patriot and a nationalist. And I want to urge that distinction on you. A patriot is someone who loves his country. A nationalist is someone who hates the other fellow's country. And it's that love for your country, without being blind to its faults, its blemishes, but respecting its deep history, its extraordinary diversity, and above all, its rich, robust, and continuing democratic traditions that will make you a better designer, a better human being, and a better Indian. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such interesting words.